seen a lab in your schooling days. It's not very much different than that. You know, you run gels, you do all the standard sort of stuff. You know, we have some fancy equipment for doing certain things, but you know, the basics is pretty similar. It's really about the questions, I think. The questions are the most important thing. So being able to understand your scientific field and to propose a hypothesis and a relevant scientific question, and then designing a way to answer those questions in the lab is really what science is all about. So this is a picture of my lab at the company. So you see, it's hard, it may be hard to see. There's some instruments here that we use to purify these proteins. You know, all the sort of standard things that you would find in a typical lab. This is a picture of part of the research area here at Genentech. This is my lab. It's made up of 3 research associates. 2 of them, these 2 are now senior research associates. This is a research associate. I have a postdoctoral student as well. The research associate has a master's, so does Irene, and Liz has a bachelor's degree. And she's been at the company many, many years, longer than I have, in fact. And then the postdoc has a PhD. The postdoc is, are you familiar with postdoc? What a postdoc is? So after you finish your PhD studies, generally if you're going to continue in a scientific field where you're going to either go back into academia and be a professor and running the lab, or if you're going to go into industry and you're going to run a research program in industry, generally you'll do a postdoc. And that's sort of a second period of time when you spend in a different lab from your PhD lab doing research and publishing. Okay, so career path. So I show this picture because I haven't met one person who really knew exactly what they were going to do or be doing at the end of their career from when they started their educational path. There are a lot of things that come up along the way that will sort of guide you in one direction or the other. So the critical thing is really that you make the right decisions for yourself and sort of provide that bias. So you make those decisions, you know, it's going to bias you in one direction or the other. Okay. And so along the way, you know, you'll find things that you didn't expect to be doing, but you'll end up loving it, and so that's why you continue to do it. So I was born and raised in Hollister, California, which is right down the road here, not too far away. As I mentioned, my father's from Mexico, first generation, and my mother from several generations back. But, you know, it was an agricultural small town, so there wasn't a lot going on there other than, you know, to hang around in school and study. What I got interested in early on in school was video games. So video games are still very popular now, right? How many of you play video games? Yeah, my brother does. He loves video games. But at the time, you know, this was the very early days. The video games had just really had just come out. And so that, because I loved doing that, it was like, it got me interested into computers. And computers was just emerging at that time too, in terms of personal home computers. Before that, you know, computers were always these big, huge things that were only in academic institutions or companies. But it was becoming accessible to have computers in your home. And I had a friend who had one of the early Apple computers in his house because his father was or his mother was a teacher. And they had just introduced these computers into the school curriculum. And so I used to go down to his house and play with a computer, and this guy was brilliant, so my friend was brilliant, and he knew how to program computer language. So not just the basic language, he knew, you know, the machine language, which was the advanced language, computing language. And I was always very impressed by this. And, you know, obviously I didn't have that background or that training, but it inspired me, and so I picked up basic programming and a little bit of machine language, but you know, I could never get to that extent. But that sort of, it really sort of, I think, changed my mind a little bit about my interests in science and computers and mathematics and this sort of area, general area. So I was sort of predisposed to go down that way. When I got into high school, I I had the luck of having great teachers in biology, in physics, and in chemistry. And these teachers were instrumental. I think they were critical in my career development because they taught me what doing science as a career was about. Right? So I didn't have those role models in my family, but the teachers knew about that. One of them was a master's degree holder, and then the other one who had a brother doing a master's degree. So I remember him bringing into the classroom a thesis, a book, which was his brother's thesis, master's thesis, and it had, some, new science in there. And he described what graduate school was and what it, and all of this. And so I became very excited about that because I wanted to pursue science as a career at that point. And so I applied to undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara. A counselor was very instrumental in sort of guiding me to UC Santa Barbara. I really didn't know where I was going to go before I had consulted with that counselor, but she sort of said, you should look at this and think about it. And I was interested in engineering at the time, and I applied as an engineer, in fact. And so when I got to UCSB, the first year was just basic science courses that everybody takes. Engineers and all of the science majors take the same courses. But I took a chemistry course, a very basic chemistry course, and it sort of connected me to my experience in high school because I remember loving chemistry in high school. And we used to, with the teacher after school, meet with a small group of people who were interested and do little chemistry experiments, sort of, outside of school extracurricular. And so that connected to me when I started at UCSB. And the other thing that connected to me was that there were students in this other college called the College of Creative Sciences, which was sort of, the school for gifted students. You had to have a certain GPA or SAT score or something to get into that school. And their curriculum was a little bit more creative. That's the creative school of creative. And so I was kind of jealous about that because I didn't have access to that. I wasn't in that program. But I was taking the normal organic chemistry lab, and I said, this is kind of boring. This is cookbook stuff, and I would really like to be doing what these guys are doing. And so I approached the professor and I said, hey, this is my situation, these are my grades, this is what I'm interested in. I'm not in the College of Creative Sciences, but maybe I could take this course. And he challenged me. He said, do you really want to do this? I mean, if you want to pursue a science career, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of sort of time spent punched over the bench, doing experiments. A lot of times they don't work. Is that really where you want to go? And, at the time, I sort of took it a little personally, right? I was like, well, this person doesn't think I can do science or anything. And in hindsight, it seems that maybe he was just making sure I had enough enthusiasm and drive to do that program. I hope that's what he was doing, and I'm not trying to discourage him. But the bottom line is that he did let me take this course. And so once I got involved with it, it was wonderful because it was more free-form type of chemistry. It was, here's a problem, here are a set of sort of reagents that you can work with, and tools, and here's what you want to achieve. And then they gave you time to do it, so you just go and sort of think about things yourself. And that was really, if you can get into a program like that, try to do it because that's really how science happens. It doesn't happen in the normal way. You learn the basics in the early lab courses, but really science is about trying to think problems through and doing trial and error. Trying things, it doesn't work, so you have to take a step back. You have to try something else. And a lot of times it doesn't work. As he was saying, it was right. You spend a lot of time doing things that don't work. But that's part of the learning process. When you take courses and you do problems, a lot of times you don't get the right answer, and then you have to take a step back and you have to figure out how to do it right. Okay, so that got me involved in undergraduate research very early on. So from sophomore year, because I had taken that creative course, my lab mate was doing undergraduate research in a lab in addition to that, because he was part of the creative science thing. And I said, hey, how do you get involved with that? And he said, why don't you just go talk to the professor? And if they have, a position or time or someone to guide you, then they'll take you. And so I went upstairs and talked to an organic chemistry professor. I said, hey, I'm really interested in doing some undergraduate research with you. And he said, yeah, sure, of course. And he introduced me to a grad student and said, why don't you start on this project? And that was wonderful. And I spent 6 months doing that. And I decided organic chemistry was not really what I wanted to do. It wasn't clicking with me. And at that time, I just started my biochemistry course, my undergraduate biochemistry course. And again, like chemistry, that really clicked with me because it was an application of chemistry to life. And then I knew that that's really what I wanted to focus on. So I switched my research lab from chemistry, organic chemistry, to a biochemistry lab, the second semester of my sophomore year. And I stayed in that lab doing undergraduate research throughout the rest of my undergraduate time there. So it was really that experience doing undergraduate research, in addition to the coursework, that sort of allowed me to prove to myself that I was capable of going on and doing original research as a graduate student. And so I applied to graduate school, and I was accepted at UC Berkeley, and there I got a PhD in molecular and cell biology. It's a 5.5-year program. It flies by very quickly, so it's not as long as it sounds. But there I got involved with something called structural biology, and that's sort of understanding the chemical structures of proteins and how those proteins achieve those structures. And so, it was a great time in my career. If there's any questions about that afterwards, I can sort of go into it in detail. But right now I don't have time to go through my whole graduate career. After graduate school, I did a postdoc. So I got interested in a problem related to neurotransmission in neurons. So in your neurons, there's these vesicles, these membrane vesicles that contain neurotransmitters, and they're sort of at the end of your neuron, your axons. And when you get a nerve impulse, they release the neurotransmitters and they signal to the next nerve cell. So there's a whole set of proteins that regulate that process. And so we were understanding how those proteins work. I did a year at Yale University, and then I moved to Stanford University to continue my work. There were some personal things that were happening in my life at that time that sort of brought me back from the East Coast back to this point. In particular, my mother got sick with cancer, and so I wanted to come back and be closer to her. And I also had that opportunity available at Stanford to do the same type of research I was doing over at Yale. So I took that opportunity. And then I finished that work in 2001, and then joined the company at Genentech, and I've been there ever since. And one of the things I focus on is understanding how these genes, so in the human genome there's about 25,000 different genes. About a quarter of those genes function outside the cell. So the cells will send these proteins outside, and they serve as messengers or molecules that guide the biology of the cells. A number of those are called orphans, which means that we don't know what they interact with or how they function. So one step to try to figure out what they do is to figure out who they interact with. So genes interact with each other. And so we take a gene and we screen it against a library of thousands of genes to try to figure out which other gene they're interacting with. And then once we figure that out, it gives us clues about what the biology underlying those proteins are. Okay, so we only have 5 minutes left.